Hello everyone, I finally got another haircut. For those who are aware of my media review channel, when I do film myself on my media review channel, which I do less frequently, I tend to position it like that so that I get more of the movie posters in the background. When I do things for my gender critical content, I tend to position it like that so I get more of my books in the background. Makes sense. Anyway, very much on schedule with what I wanted to be doing. But yeah, the other thing I've been doing, because I have a schedule, I'm one of those people who, I'm sure I've mentioned this before, I'm one of those people who schedules my time. And the thing is, it's all well and good having a schedule. Keeping a schedule, that's a different issue. You can cut a schedule and then, and the thing that I've done to help with that is I realized there's actually a clock app on my computer, because I'd often set up timers on my phone, but the fact of having to go away and pick up my phone, and what if I needed to put my phone on charge and blah blah blah, meant I would just become inconsistent with that. Whereas now I just have a like I say, timer on my phone, on my computer, so I just load up that, boom, sorted. Anyway, let me just make sure I've shut down everything that will make a loud noise. Of course, what we're doing today is we are responding to Sentient Darkness, this guy who made a response video to me. We are 47... It started playing. We are 47 minutes and 38 seconds into it right now. I will click on the start record button. There we go. That's a useful tip for me when I start syncing this up in the editing phase. I just clicked the start record button now. You can see it here. 47 minutes, 38 seconds. We made a good amount of progress last time. I feel like this time we're going to make even more progress because, like I say, I've got a bit more time to actually make that progress than I've had in the past. Let's jump into it, right? Let's go.
It's not how I define.
Oh, I'm going to be drinking my smoothie. Also, you'll notice I'm dressed a little bit more revealingly than usual. It's finally become sort of hot in the UK, although more accurately, it was hot over the weekend, which was lovely. Hot over the weekend, great. Presently, it's cloudy but humid, so it's by no means cold, but it's not sunny and lovely. Anyway, let's go.
It's only very stereotypical because I was combining what would have otherwise been identity and expression into one thing, as I didn't want to give a more complicated analogy.
Okay, so I'm going to have to just explain the point I made there. I kind of wish that this guy... I know I shouldn't complain about other people's style of making videos when, you could say my style of making videos isn't exactly maximized for efficiency, but this guy often plays me saying things and making a point. I sort of wish he would just summarize my point, because I think it's a bit annoying to have to watch my entire thing of me saying things, especially things, I'll admit, I don't say things in the most efficient way possible, which I think, as far as my videos are concerned, if I don't say things in the most efficient way possible, that's not the end of the world. But if someone's going to reply to me, then them, especially if that person themselves doesn't necessarily make their responses in the most efficient way possible, you've got me making a point not in the most efficient way possible, that being played in full, and now I'm in a situation where, what do? Do I play my initial point that he's responding to being made not maximally efficiently, and then play his response not necessarily being made maximally efficiently, and then I make my response? No, anyway. So essentially the point I made there was that he was talking about, so just to, picking up where we were last time, he makes the analogy that maybe being trans age makes sense if somebody behaves in a way or wants to be treated in a way that is typical of somebody of a different age. They could claim to be trans age. And I'm saying, well, that's fine, but if you're making that analogous to being transgender, then you're basically arguing that being a man or woman is defined by stereotypes. And the specific examples it gives are things like, if you like music from the 1950s, that could show that you are trans age. Well, that's equivalent to saying, oh, if you like doing the dishes, that could show you're transgender if you're a man, because it might indicate you're actually a woman, which of course is very sexist and stereotypical. And his response is to say, well, that's because I was intentionally combining gender expression and gender identity. So don't do that then. Because basically what you're saying there is, well, sure, I made it seem stereotypical because I was combining this very stereotypical notion with what I actually meant. I say, well, yeah, obviously if you combine stereotypes with what you actually meant, you're going to end up saying something stereotypical. But the problem is, and this is the issue we always come back down to, with trans identity, either you say that trans identity is just about identity itself, in which case it becomes circular, because you can't define an identity with reference to an identity, because then you just... or you define it with reference to some external referent. The only two external references that make any sense are your biological sex or your social behavior and things related to that, like sociological things. Now, if you say biological sex, well, you're gender critical. So if you're not gender critical, you then have to say sociological behavior, and that's sexist. And that's kind of the issue and that's the double bind, which again, I'll reiterate now, even though I'm sure you all know about it. Basically, it's either you say something completely of no substance, or you say something that's completely sexist. And this guy's saying, well, just to make things simpler, I included all of this sexist stuff. But no, what if we're being honest, you did, is you included all that sexist stuff because it's the only way you could make what you're saying sound substantial. And it's this common bait and switch they do, where, if they are called upon to substantiate why it makes sense to understand a biological male as a woman, they'll say things like, well, they live their life as a woman, things like that. And what does live their life as a woman mean? It means perform stereotypical femininity, perform the social role of a woman, things like that. But then when you say, well, hold on a minute, that makes it sound like trans identity is a fundamentally sexist concept. I say, no. I was just using that as like an example, or like I was just combining things or simplifying things. But obviously it's more complicated than that. Well, how's it more complicated? It's more complicated because actually a woman is someone who identifies as a woman. That's not more complicated. That's just circular anyway. So yeah, I'm not convinced by that response of just like, well, I was just combining things to make it simpler.
But it looks like I'll have to. Having a 74
Okay, he is going to elaborate. That is good.
4-year-old identity would be defined as wanting to be treated like a typical person who has lived on Earth for its 74 rotations around the sun, and having a 74-year-old expression would be defined as looking and acting like an average 74-year-old.
Okay, so this is when you kind of get back to double bind, because he's saying, well, it would be wanting to be treated like someone who has, been on the Earth 74 years around the sun, whatever. The issue is, okay, so say, okay, in what sense do you want to be treated like a 74-year-old? Or in what sense do you want, just say 74-year-old, keep it simple. The whole, you know what I'm saying? When I say, this is the problem with like the circular thing. When I'm talking about being treated like a 74-year-old, I'm talking about being treated like an actual 74-year-old. What aspect of wanting to be treated like a 74-year-old are you specifically saying? Are you saying it's, people assuming what kind of music you'll like maybe people will think that you like old-fashioned music, being, it's hard to think because I don't know how many age stereotypes there are, but I don't know, like people assuming maybe you're not a great driver. Are you talking about any of that stuff? People buying you comfortable slippers for Christmas? Well, to be fair, I could go for some comfortable slippers. I want some slippers that kind of lace up. These are my slippers right now. They're a bit of a disaster. They look nice and they're kind of old people slippers, but the thing is, they flop around enough that very occasionally I will trip on my way up the stairs. I'll be walking upstairs and it will like kind of just flop around enough that it will get caught. I just go, which I've done holding food at some points. Almost dropped my croissant. Remember that Vine? Anyway, so yeah, I wish I had some slippers that kind of just were tighter. But I'm sure what people are like, oh, they're not slippers, are they? Are we really going to focus on definitions and things being what they actually are on this channel? I think not. When you say you want to be treated like 74-year-old, is it all these stereotypical things? Well, if it is, then the problem is you're defining it with reference to stereotypes. So you say, okay, well, we're not, obviously this guy's insistent he's not talking about stereotypes, so we have to take all that off the table. So what is he actually saying? Well, he's saying you want to be treated like a 74-year-old, meaning you want people to basically just say you're 74. Meaning, in other words, you're saying you just want to be identified as 74, but the issue is, if you're saying you want to be identified as something, you're basically recreating that circular thing, because to be identified as something is just to be said you are that thing. So it's basically to be that thing is to want people to say that you want to be that thing, which is, that's the issue. It's essentially, sorry, I'm moving my hands such that the camera went out of focus. You're stuck in that loop of a woman is someone who identifies as someone who identifies as someone who identifies as someone. Because if the only part of the identity that's substantial is wanting to be called that thing, well, that's just a different way of saying identifying as that thing. If you say you want to identify, if you say that you want to be called 74 or be considered 74, you're saying you identify as 74. But if you use that as your definition, that doesn't work, because the whole point of a definition is working out what it means to be that thing. So to say what it means to be that thing is to want to be called that thing, that doesn't work as a definition. Some kind of medicinal study, it doesn't matter. Somebody could say, well, when you're looking at your results, I just want you to look at them as though I was 74 years old. It's like, wow, you're incredibly healthy for a 74-year-old.
The problem with this is that we can actually understand the world as it is, with the understanding that definitions can differ from person to person. If somebody was using the definition of 74-year-old, which was proposed in the analogy...
I actually did think that was quite a funny point I made about how you can't understand. I think I will include that. Yeah, if you just completely make up what age means, then you're not going to be able to describe the world in reality. The issue is he's saying, well, we can say people have different definitions that vary from person to person. Okay, that's fine. But when it comes to actual society and how we as a society are going to talk, and the whole English language thing that we have, we're going to have a general word we use. So we might say, well, there's some people who, for them, being a woman means whatever, blah, 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 some nonsense. But when a politician or an artist or someone who is basically making a broad statement to the public, or an academic writing a non-fiction book, when they use the word woman, we need to know what they actually mean by that, because we can't say that they're using whatever definition anyone wants to understand them as meaning. If I'm looking at a study about age or sex or race, it's important I know the specific way the person who wrote the study is using those words. You could say, well, in that context, they can write at the start of the study, oh, well, this is how we're defining the term. Okay, that's fine. But not every single conversation is an essay. Not every single conversation starts off by rigorously defining terms. And I think that's maybe the issue, because I use the term analytic utility. And I can understand you might be thinking, well, sure, when we're having a serious analytic discussion, we can just take the time to define terms and establish specifically what we mean. But what I would say is that analytic utility is something that, even though it sounds fancy, it can happen in just casual conversation. Yeah, I mean, how many times, or maybe, I don't know if you do, maybe you're all too woke for this, but, how many times do you just have a conversation casually about the difference between men and women? In that conversation, you're assuming what a man and a woman is. And, there's many other examples of that where you could just be having a casual conversation. The point is that there's many, many situations where we just assume everyone's using the same terms. And actually, what's being spoken about is stuff that kind of matters, at least just in terms of knowing what people are saying. And that's where this whole, well, people could just be using the terms differently thing breaks down. And yeah, I'm not saying that people can't ever be using the terms in weird ways, especially in specific contexts. Maybe that can make sense. I think, I guess maybe, for example, if someone was writing about one specific facet of biological sex, or maybe even one specific facet of, something to do with the sociological experience of being a woman, maybe in that context they might say, just so you know, for the intents and purposes of this discussion, when I use the word man or woman, I'm referring specifically to this one thing. And everything else, even though there could be diversity such that not every single person would actually technically be a woman or would usually be considered a woman that I'm describing as a woman, for this conversation, it's simpler. I think a good example would be where we're talking about, let's say, we use the example that's already been way back at the beginning of this video, ovarian tissue. If somebody has, if I'm talking about, let's say, some kind of study to do with ovarian tissue, then I might just assume, for the sake of analogy, or the sake of keeping the argument going, I'll use the word woman to describe people with ovarian tissue. Even though in reality, I know that not every single person who has ovarian tissue is going to be a woman, because there are biological males who, due to differences of sexual development, have some ovarian tissue in their body anyway. The interesting thing about this is that you'll probably notice this actually works in favor of gender critical people a lot of the time, because something that gender critical people will often get made fun of for is that they will often talk about one very specific aspect of biological sex, act as if that one specific aspect fully encompasses the difference between men and women, and then trans activists will be like, oh, but you missed off this difference of sexual development, blah, blah, blah. Oh, so you're saying every single person with this thing has to always be a man or has to always be a woman and can never be anything else? Well, no, actually, maybe. So yeah, I'm actually willing to say that sometimes, in the interest of just having a discussion about a specific thing, but keeping the language simple, we could just say, okay, for the intents of this discussion, even though not technically every single man has this attribute, or not every single woman lacks this attribute, or whatever, I'm going to use the terms man and woman to refer to people who have these attributes, just because that's simpler and easier than saying every single time individuals who have this attribute, or persons who have, whatever. It's easier to just say man and woman. I can understand that, but as you can see from what I just said there, that works better for gender critical people. Here's the thing, one of the points of language is to really make things more concise. That's one of the reasons we have... That's actually... Okay, so I'm going to pause there and see what he says in response, but that's actually very relevant to what I was just saying, because he said... Well, you could just... Well, I guess I'll include everything you just said there, or my explanation of what you just said. You can just ask people questions. I'm saying, well, that doesn't really work, because the point of language is it's supposed to be more concise. Obviously, that's very relevant to what I was saying earlier about how, with the analytic utility thing, a lot of the time you're going to be having casual conversations where defining terms every single time is kind of pointless. So that's my argument. Let's see what he says.
And if King Critical wants to use this criticism, then he must do so consistently and argue against all people who use different definitions of words than him, if it leads to him having to use more words to communicate. The second reason is that...
Okay, so I guess that's point one. So point one is that no matter what, there will be people who use words differently. So, you always need to object to this or whatever. The thing about that is that most words people use casually, either the differences in how they use them are so small that it doesn't really matter, or it's going to be very rare that people are using fundamentally different definitions. In casual conversation, you need to use words that pretty much everyone can know what you mean, but it's perfectly fine in analytic conversations that you can discuss terms, and that's what happens, and that's fine. I'm not saying... Yeah, I think it's ridiculous to say, well, if King Critical is going to object to the fact that defining woman in a radically different way will lead to confusion, then he has to object to any time anyone defines any word in a weird way or a different way, because that would lead to confusion too. It's like, no, because it depends on context. We use the word woman a lot. It also depends on the definition. I think, I'll give an example. The term faith. In religious conversations, there's often a question like, do Christians have faith, or do religious people have faith? And if they do have faith, is having faith automatically something that is worthy of derision or suspicion? Does it mean believing something even though there's no evidence to believe it? And then there's a question, do atheists have faith? And you'll often get a lot of equivocation, sometimes I think maybe accidental equivocation, where someone might say, well, I believe in God because I have faith. And then they'll say, but atheists have faith that the sun will rise tomorrow because they don't know it for certain and they believe it. But it's like, well, that's not really the exact same thing, is it? Because, there is, what's the word I'm looking for? Empirical evidence that the sun rises every day, every 24 hours, obviously slightly getting skewed due to axial tilt. But the point is, I don't really need to elaborate. You can see how, in that situation, use of the word faith can be a point of confusion, and it might even be a source of frustration when some people use the word faith in a quite different way to how another person might use it. I don't feel the need to elaborate on this too much, because I think the point's pretty obvious, right? It depends on how frequently you're having to clarify these terms and how contrary the definition being offered is to what you think it obviously should be.
that you can just make up another word to make language more concise again. For example, in the case of a person who is defining age differently to you, all you have to do is ask them what word they use for the amount of time it takes for the Earth to do a full rotation around.
Okay, so this is his second point. His second point just there was that the other reason that it's fine is because people can just invent a new word to describe a new concept. The issue of that is that's not something you can just like casually say. You can't just be like, oh, it doesn't matter if people radically define words differently because people can just invent new words. Because it's like, yeah, if this is like an organic change that's happening to language, then eventually, yeah, people will just start using new words. But that's not what this is. This is a very politically motivated ideology that's telling us to completely redefine words. Obviously, it's ridiculous to say anytime a significant group of people comes up with a completely new definition, that's fine, because we could just come up with a completely new word to describe what we used to mean. And he's saying, oh, this would make it just as concise. It wouldn't, because you'd have to be like, okay, so use that word now. That word, has that word changed meaning recently? Have we like had another concept come along and it's meant we've had to like use a new word to mean something else and blah, blah, blah. It doesn't make it simpler. And the final issue of this, which isn't directly relevant to what he's saying, but I pointed out before, which is that because biological male and biological female are the only way of distinguishing between men and women in a way that has any substance to it, if we actually did start using a different word to specifically identify males and females, eventually trans activists would try to take those words too, because the reason they care about the words man and woman is because they perceive them to have substance. But once the words man and woman become completely detached from biological sex, they will no longer have any substance, so they won't be happy about having those words. So even for trans activists, this isn't actually a solution.
And then whenever you want to get across the concept of a time unit it takes for the Earth to fully rotate around the sun, you can say E here when talking to this person. Clearly this doesn't...
I don't understand it, because I guess he's about to say clearly that this isn't a problem or something like that, but it's like, yeah, it is.
Make language much less, if any less concise. It'll just require a small conversation, like the ones you'll have.
That makes it... Having to have like any length of conversation to establish the meaning of a word is making language massively less concise.
As an example, I've heard some trans people try to define woman as anyone who identifies as a woman, which is just an incoherent definition, because you get an infinite regress, and never actually get to understand what the word means. In fact,
I don't understand how he thinks his definition is that much different. His definition is literally just a woman is someone who identifies as a woman with extra steps. Because it's like a woman is someone who wants to be treated the way a typical biological female wants to be treated. Okay, and in what way does a typical biological female want to be treated? Is it with reference to sociological factors and things like that, and like behavior? And then he'll say no, because that is sexist, and he seems to be resistant to the idea that his definition would be sexist, so he wouldn't accept that. But then it's like, okay, so what's actually about? It's like, well, it's just wanting to be called a woman, which is what biological females are called. It's like, okay, so a woman is someone who wants to be called a woman. That's the same as saying a woman is someone who identifies as a woman.
not all mental anguish is mental illness. The same way, if someone gets nervous or anxious talking to large groups of people, it doesn't necessarily mean they're mentally ill. Next, King Critical goes on to talk about
I don't think I massively care about that. I'm just like, I'm trying to be a little bit, what's the word, circumspect about the number of things I respond to, but there basically the question was, just because someone feels anguish, it doesn't always mean they feel mentally ill. Like if someone gets nervous about, giving a meeting to a large group of people, that's fine. But you're talking about someone feeling anxious about the fundamental nature of what their body is in like biological reality. That to me seems very different. And I just don't see how you can say that someone believing that them being let's say biological male, someone believing them being biological male is wrong, and they are supposed to be a woman, and they're supposed to change their body to make themselves a woman. I don't see how you can't say that is just on a surface level, obviously a mental illness issue, fundamentally based on what it is, like the reality of what it is.
If what he meant is that somebody can't claim to be a woman because they're perceived to be a woman, this is also true. But like with the other interpretation, just a gender wasn't saying that somebody is a woman, just if they're perceived to be one.
Okay, so really quick there. Basically, I said that somebody experiencing misogyny does not make them a woman. And he agreed with me, but then said that the person I was responding to didn't say that either. Now, it's been a while since I've seen the video. This is the person I was responding to was Jessie Gender. My suspicion is that within the context of the wider video, Jessie Gender mentioning that a man could experience misogyny was intended to contribute to this idea through implication that a biological male can be a woman based on experiencing misogyny. You know, if you're watching a video from someone who's a trans ideologue who fundamentally believes a biological male can be a woman, and one of the things they mention is that if a biological male is perceived to be a woman, then they will experience misogyny, I think it's reasonable to assume that they are on some level arguing that the fact that a biological male in being perceived as a woman might experience misogyny makes them a woman. And I don't think that's accurate, obviously, and this guy actually agrees it's not accurate. He's just saying, well, that's not what Jessie Gender explicitly said, and it's like, okay, yeah, fine, but I think it's worth me pointing out, if I'm responding to a video by a trans ideologue and they make a point of saying, you know, biological males can experience misogyny, it's worth me saying, well, such a person does not, in having experienced misogyny, become a woman. And I'll just say very briefly, I've said before, I think that biological males can experience misogyny, and my simple argument for it is, well, what if you don't even, like, what if someone is on a chat room and they pretend to be a woman and someone says, you know, something misogynistic to them? In that context, I would argue that's a biological male experiencing misogyny. Now, are they experiencing it in the exact same way that a woman would experience who actually is a woman? No, but what is misogyny? Misogyny is the hatred of women. So if someone pretends to be a woman and then experiences someone else expressing hatred towards them based on them thinking they're a woman, that is a man experiencing misogyny. I am perfectly, like, I know there are some gender critical people who will really make a point of resisting the idea that a biological male could experience misogyny. I'm very much of the opinion that that notion is not a particularly offensive notion at all. What matters is stressing that even if a biological male does experience misogyny, which is not impossible, that doesn't prove they're a woman. That's what I would prefer to say. I'm somebody who's like, yeah, there are trans-identified males who do actually pass, who do actually give the impression that they're biologically female. But even then, it doesn't take a particularly intense survey of just the general trans-identified community to see. So his objection to this is going to be that I don't quote or provide a specific study to show that not that many trans-identified males pass. Which is, sure, I'm arguing based on, intuition, I guess, just a general, like I kind of say there, just a survey of the community. When you usually, I respond to a lot of trans-identified males. Some of them, like I say, I don't know if I'll include this clip because it depends how I edit it, but I do think there are trans-identified males who I personally would say pass. One of the big ones I would say is Lily Alexandre, and I've had people in my comments say, oh wait, is this person trans? I can't tell. Because yeah, Lily Alexandre, all credit where's due. I don't think it really matters. It doesn't make someone, passing doesn't make someone a woman at all, but I think Lily Alexandre does appear to be a woman. But the point is, you literally just have to use your eyes to look at a lot of these trans-identified males and say, well, no, you can tell they are biologically male. I will say, I think there's three, I've kind of wanted to make a video about this, but I'll give you a little sneak preview. I think there's different levels of passing, because I think there's passing number one, we'll call it A-star passing, is somebody appears to be a woman, you would assume they're a woman, and if someone said, oh, actually, they're biologically male, you would be surprised to hear that. Passing level number two, I don't know if these are all levels, but this is just an idea I was thinking about, would be someone, I realized I switched from an A grade to a level thing, just ignore that, whatever. Passing level two would be someone who, if you looked at them, you'd think they're a woman, or you'd be willing to admit or think that they're a woman. But passing level number 2 is if you would think of them as a woman casually at first glance, blah blah blah, but upon someone pointing out they're a trans-identified male, you're like, oh, actually I can see that. That's like passing level number 2. Passing level number 3 would be you can tell this person is not biologically female, but the way they look means that you can easily enough trick yourself into pretending the person is a woman. So I think this is, for example, I know that ContraPoints claims to usually, when going to an establishment or something like that, be referred to by female pronouns. Now, that doesn't surprise me. What I think it's worth considering there is that people might be internally like, oh, that person is, or let's say, they would automatically regard ContraPoints as a woman. But deep down, they know that ContraPoints is in fact biologically male, and that is actually something that is immediately obvious to them. I think like another good analogy I'd make here would be with kind of sexuality, where it would be, this is actually a whole other conversation in itself, but essentially, I think that it is not unreasonable to imagine that biological males or straight men will find certain trans-identified males to be attractive. And what I would clarify as like, or classify as like level 3 would be the situation where if you're a straight dude, you're like, well, you know what? On a visceral level, I appreciate the effort, but I can tell, when I say appreciate the effort, you know, like I can tell this person is in some sense touching on certain things that would be attractive to me as a biological straight heterosexual male. But I can also tell this person is not actually a biological female. That's level 3. And then level 4 would be kind of everything else, like not passing at all. That's just a little extra thing I wanted to throw out there. The 4 different levels of passing that I've thought of, from like, wait, I actually think this person's biologically female, to, oh, I thought this person was biologically female, but now that you point out they're biologically male, I can like see the obvious indicators of that, to, you know what, I was willing to like think of this person as a woman, or it's not difficult for me to think of this person as a woman because of certain things they've got going on, certain signifiers, but it's still pretty obvious that they are biologically male, and that's not something I even needed you to point out to, yeah, this person's a biological male, and it's not even close. There's nothing about anything from them that's even giving the beginnings of woman, just pure, well, I was going to say man in a dress, maybe not even man. I guess there's like level 5, which is like someone like me who's just like how I look with she, her in my bio. Yeah, so that's just the point. But I guess the thing I'm saying there is that passing, I think, is a bit of a spectrum, but the number of people who are here who are like, oh, I just completely 100% I believe they're biologically female is going to be pretty damn low.
He heard me speak the words that I did, saying that he didn't provide evidence for the claim he made, and what does he do? Repeat his claim and say it doesn't take a particularly intense survey to see that most trans women are perceived as members of the male sex based on how they look. Well, King Critical, if it...
I like how I've literally done that again. Yeah. I'm just going to keep doing that. I don't know, like, maybe there is a study out there that shows it, but I'm still completely content to just say, you know what, look, I have eyes, I live in the real world, and I can tell you that most of the time it's not hard to tell. I know like people go, oh, bad toupee fallacy. Maybe there are loads of really convincing trans-identified males, but you just don't see them all the time. The thing is, I would argue the opposite. I think that the trans-identified males I see are likely to be more convincing because they are going to be the ones who are confident enough to set themselves up in front of a camera. Because I'm thinking about, for example, you know, Blair White I've never really responded to, but Samantha Lux, I'm trying to think about like trans-identified males who I particularly respond to. I mean, I've already said Lily Alexandria I think is quite convincing. I think Samantha Lux is pretty convincing. ContraPoints, like I say, is more in that kind of level 3 category of like, you know, I can obviously pick up the womanly vibes insofar as the concept of womanly, obviously that's a regressive notion, but we live in a society. And that's quite a high proportion of the people I respond to, because then like other people I respond to, like Jesse Gender, Philosophy Tube, well, they're not as convincing at all. Jesse Gender probably least so. But the point is, you would actually expect that the people who, like I say, are going to be confident enough to get on YouTube, and also the people who are going to be quite successful as YouTubers, and they're the people who are more likely to be the ones who I've responded to multiple times, are going to have probably a fair bit of money, especially considering that, unlike me, that their content is considered to be advertiser friendly, even though it's often encouraging people to do things that are physically harmful to their bodies. That's fair, isn't it? Thank you for your contributions, people on Patreon. Then you think about all of the people with the anime profiles on Twitter who, have she, her in their bio and the trans flag and all that kind of stuff. How many of those do you think pass?
You provided 0 surveys and you expect people to just believe you? That's exactly what pseudoscientific hacks do. They make...
Can I say this? 2 things. One, when I say survey, I mean like a survey. I don't mean like a literal survey. I mean like you survey something. Like you can survey the landscape. That doesn't mean, get out a spreadsheet or whatever. It means look at it. The other thing is, my intention here was not to convince anyone. Like, my assumption when I say most of the time you can tell that a trans-identified male is in fact biologically male, my assumption is that a good number of people would just agree with me anyway. And for the people who wouldn't agree with me saying that isn't really for them. I think that that's something that people need to realize is an obvious thing that anyone's going to do. Sometimes you'll say something because you believe it's true, and you're saying it with the expectation that people who also believe it's true will agree with you. Like if I was talking about a movie and I was like, yeah, I really love Dune 2 because Timothée Chalamet is so hot. I'm obviously not saying that with the expectation that anyone who doesn't think Timothée Chalamet is hot would agree with my assessment there. I'm saying it with the assumption that for the people who do agree with that, they'd be like, yeah, he is hot. And like that may be, something that is worth hearing for them, because maybe that's something that they were considering when they were watching Dune. So I'm speaking to something they can relate to. But yeah, obviously for the people who don't think he's hot, they're just going to be like, no, he's not. But again, me saying that wasn't intended to convince them. Basic kind of feminist analysis would lead you to have to include does actually have some significance in terms of how people are raised.
This is a very minor objection. I do agree that it's possible that trans women might not have the full experience of a misogynistic upbringing, even if they realize they're trans earlier in their...
Okay, that's not a minor objection. I assume he's saying, so basically what I said is that even if a biological trans-identified male does come to experience misogyny as they get older and pass more because of, surgery and stuff, the reality is that in feminist analysis, how you're raised is really, really important. So unless we're talking about scenarios where someone basically has another gender imposed upon them basically from birth by crazy parents, in that case, yeah, I guess you could say, that they experienced misogyny despite being biologically male their whole life. Like they were basically literally raised as a woman and never knew anything other than being a woman. But that's a very rare scenario. And for a lot of trans-identified males, they can't claim to have experienced misogyny or anything like that because they can't have been living as a woman for like any of their childhood at all, really. And to be fair, they probably shouldn't have been for any period of their childhood, because that's obviously like not the kind of thing that should be happening to children who are basically below the age of consent. And obviously you could say, well, they could live in an effeminate way. Like I don't have a problem with young children being effeminate, but that's not living as a woman, like being bullied, for example, as an effeminate boy, which I unfortunately I think might happen for a lot of effeminate boys, would obviously be bad, but that's not misogyny. So I think that's another key distinction. I imagine a lot of people get confused about that. They think, well, I was growing up, I was a boy, I was effeminate, and I was bullied for that, therefore I experienced misogyny, therefore I understand women's experiences. Women aren't bullied as effeminate boys. Women experience, like there is a massive difference between misogyny and, I don't really know what the like simple term for it would be, but like I say, the bullying of effeminate boys. Those two things are just fundamentally different. And again, that's another situation where I assume that anyone who knows anything about just society and just observe reality, the difference between those two things is obvious. Obviously, I mean, the former, or the latter, I can't remember which one I said, the effeminacy thing is a lot of the time often due to homophobia, stuff like that. The other big difference, just in case you did want one big substantial difference to point to, is that effeminate boys are bullied specifically for presenting in a feminine way. I don't think it's accurate to say that women experience misogyny specifically for presenting in a feminine way, except for in the sense that you could say, well, all women experience some misogyny, but there's no specific heightened misogyny that comes from women presenting in a feminine way, usually. And of course, that's the other thing, which is that they'll often experience misogyny for not presenting in a feminine way. If a woman gets made fun of and called, a lesbian or whatever for dressing like a tomboy or something, well, that's misogyny, and it's a fundamentally different experience from the experience of an effeminate boy who, if they didn't present in a feminine way, I guess they would not experience any bullying at all.
And in fact, whatever male privilege they may have at workplaces in relation to their pay is overshadowed by the fact that they earn so much less than the average of all women in the LGBTQ+ community, and even less than trans men. I'm sure it's possible that there are other areas of discrimination.
Okay, so I'm going to try and make some progress there. You'll notice that the camera just ran out of batteries and it went dark for a second. That's because I was just letting it play, because essentially he was making the same point over and over again, which is me saying about certain realities of like trans people existing and stuff like that is just obvious. And he was just, every single time he was just saying, well, where's your scientific study for these things? Like at one point I said that a lot of trans people are going to experience bigotry for being gender non-conforming instead of bigotry for misogyny. Most biological males look obviously like biological males, so if they're wearing a dress, it's far more likely that if they face any kind of grief for that, it's because someone's identifying them as a man in a dress rather than someone identifying them as a woman. But the specific thing he said there, which I found funny, was that trans-identified males, aka trans women, are they experience more lower wages than all other women in the LGBTQ+ community. Now, here's the thing about that. Think about this for a second. What is going to be a huge number of the number of women in the LGBTQ+ community? It's going to be lesbians. And think this through for a second. What is the biggest reason? Pretty much we know the biggest reason why women tend to make less money than men. It's because they get pregnant and then they have to take time off work, and there is an expectation that they raise kids. It's also true that many women, unfortunately, end up, because of traditional gender stereotypes when it comes to relationships, many women are expected to do a lot of the unpaid domestic labor. So that's another reason why their work gets, or their wages get knocked down considerably. Lesbians are far more likely to avoid both those things. Firstly, in a lesbian relationship, there is no traditional expectation about who stays home and does all the domestic labor, the unpaid domestic labor. It might be the case that one of them ends up doing it, but there's not the expectation, so they're likely to be making a fair bit of money based on that. And when it comes to children, obviously they can't have children unless they get a sperm donor. I think you would imagine lesbians are far more likely to end up just being childless. So, again, that's another reason. And by the way, even if one of them ends up, like even if they do get a sperm donor, only one of them is going to actually put in the work or have to take the time off work in order to get pregnant. So I just wanted to point out that saying that sounds like significant, like, oh, trans-identified males, they are the most, they earn the lowest wages compared to other women in the LGBTQ+ community. But what you're basically saying there is they earn lower wages than lesbians. But then you think about it, you're like, well, actually, the fact that lesbians earn a fair bit of money isn't that shocking when you consider that the main reasons why women, I know there are other reasons, like women tend to be a bit more shy about asking for wage increases and stuff like that, but certainly some of the big reasons why women tend to earn less money don't apply to lesbians. And by the way, that's especially significant when you consider the fact that there's some evidence now that women in their early 20s earn more money than their male counterparts. And like the thing is that then obviously drops off as women start having kids and getting married and things like that. But of course, because that's not true for lesbians, because lesbians won't have kids and get married, there are probably some lesbians, like a good number of lesbians, who are really bringing the average up. And I don't know what the studies say, but I wouldn't be surprised to hear that lesbians nowadays are often earning more money than men, than they're like men of the same age. I would not be surprised to find out at all. But I just have to say that literally choosing to not have male privilege so that you can pretend to be a woman is kind of gross.
How exactly is it gross for trans women to act in a feminine way so they're more likely to be recognized as women?
Sorry, I let that play for a bit, but I'll just explain what I imagine I meant there. What I meant is that considering how much women struggle to fight back against oppression, against sexist oppression, choosing to accept that oppression as some kind of affirmation, yeah, I do think that's kind of gross. Like, that's all I'll say about that. Like, oppression, the same way I think it would be gross for again, the transracial analogy, it always works. The same way I think it would be gross for somebody to choose to take upon themselves discrimination experienced by black people in order to validate their identity as a black person. Considering how much black people struggle against that oppression, to choose to take that oppression for yourself as part of like your effort to validate belonging to a particular demographic, I think that's not appropriate.
So not only are there individuals with both XX and XY chromosomes at the same time, meaning they have chromosomes which function to produce both large and...
Okay, so we're on a section called the non-binarity of sex. I really want to just let this play because I want to make progress with this video. Like, obviously, I kind of want to reach the halfway point. We have to get at least halfway because we need to. So I think I'm just going to like let this play just because I like the whole binary thing. It's getting to a whole load of weeds about like specific things. You know, you can see the point he's making here about like, oh, chromosomes, blah, blah, blah. If I explain this, it would take ages, and it's stuff that I've explained before. You know, you can see other stuff. You can look at the videos by the Paradox Institute if you want to know about, you know, why sex is a binary. I could only, you know, like usually all the stuff I say about sex being a binary, it's pretty much just second-hand stuff anyway, where, you know, I've learned it from other people. So I'm just going to let this play and pretty much ignore it because I don't think it massively matters.
My definitions don't have to be the main definitions for them to be an example of what trans and trans-supportive people can think man and woman is without thinking that man or woman essences exist. Just showing one example proves that.
Okay, so here he's saying like, oh, there's no concrete evidence that anybody believes in man essences or woman essences. To that I would say, the issue is that because of the circularity of, you know, a woman is someone who identifies as a woman, it's reasonable to think that someone must believe that in some way identifying as a woman has some substance to it, just in and of itself. And that belief would necessitate the idea that there must be some kind of essence to being a woman that can basically speak to someone meaningfully being a woman just by saying they are a woman. That's what I'd say there regarding why I think it makes sense, even though, because like you say, you know, trans activists, they'll never specifically say man essence and woman essence, but I think it is clear that they believe in it when you consider the fact they literally believe that saying that you are a woman, saying you are a man, bestows upon you a womanness or manness that actually causes you to become a woman or a man.
There's only laws which punish people for going into the wrong bathrooms, but this can only be enforced if somebody actually finds out that someone went into the wrong bathrooms, and only after it's already happened.
Okay, so basically what you're saying here is that the fact that trans identity specifically allows men to enter women's bathrooms doesn't really matter because right now, or even without trans identity, people are still allowed to enter the wrong bathroom anyway because the laws against it aren't enforced. And to this, you know, I feel like it's been a while since I've said this, but there is a massive difference between explicitly allowing something to the point that you're pretty much even endorsing it and tolerating something de facto because you can't actually properly enforce the prohibition of it. Of course, there's a difference between saying you can get away with this thing because it's not enforced. So yes, a biological male, I guess, sometimes can use a women's bathroom. But there's a big difference between that and explicitly saying No, you're allowed to go into this space. It's fine if you go into this space. And not only just in terms of morality is there a difference between that, but in terms of practice, there's a difference between that. Because when you start actually communicating, which is what people are doing now, saying anyone can use whatever bathroom they like, that's actually going to lead men to take advantage of it. Having it so just de facto they can get away with it isn't necessarily going to encourage that many men to do it. Saying you can do this, and if someone calls you out, they're a bigot, that's going to encourage men to actually do it. So that is the difference. Anyway, I'm going to wrap up the video really quick because I want to stick to the amount of time, like I say, I like having a schedule, stick to the amount of time that I've given myself to talk about this issue. And I wanted to give myself as much time as possible to actually make a dent in the video. We're officially over halfway, only just. I really hope this isn't part 5, but I have a horrible feeling it is, in which case, based on our rate of progress, we won't be done until part 10. My dream scenario would be that we're able to do just over 20 minutes per video for the next 3 parts, so this only ends up taking 8 minutes. Or 8 parts, rather, but we'll see. I mean, it's, whatever. I guess I've got to give it attention because this guy responded to me. Anyway, alright, bye everyone. See you all next week.